Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at one of those stories you think you know. The Wright Brothers.
Right, Orville and Wilbur Wright. The first flight at Kitty Hawk. It's almost a piece of American folklore.
Exactly. We all see that famous black and white photo in our heads, the plane just lifting off the rail. But the real story, the thing that's so much more fascinating, isn't just that one 12-second hop.
No, not at all. It's the intellectual journey, the how. How did two brothers who didn't even have high school diplomas, running a small bicycle shop in Ohio,
Right.
how did they solve the problem of flight when you had these hugely funded, government-backed projects failing spectacularly?
That's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to cut through the myth and really focus on the mechanics and the scientific rigor that made it all possible, because they basically invented the language of aviation that we still use today.
And we can really just state the core finding right up front. Their entire mindset was different. Everyone else was thinking about power, bigger engines.
Just brute force it into the air.
Yeah, exactly. The Wrights realized that flight wasn't about power. It was about dynamic, continuous control.
That's the word, control.
They weren't trying to just shove a glider into the sky. They were obsessed with creating a system that would let a pilot constantly manage the plane's equilibrium in 3 dimensions.
And that's so critical. You can even see it in their first big patent. When they finally got it in 1906, it wasn't a patent for a flying machine.
No.
It was a patent for a system of aerodynamic control. They knew they had to manage the air, not just, ride on it.
So to understand that, you have to go back to Dayton, Ohio, late 1800s.
Yeah.
Wilbur and Orville, born in 1867 and 1871. Their father, Milton Wright, was a clergyman, so they were often called the Bishop's Boys.
And their education, or I guess the lack of a formal one, it's so interesting. Neither of them ever got a high school diploma.
Right. Wilbur finished the 4 years, but never bothered to get the actual diploma. He was brilliant, planning to go to Yale, but then he had this terrible accident.
A hockey accident, of all things.
Yeah, a hockey stick to the face. It left him with some health complications, but also, it seems, it sent him into a period of withdrawal. He just stayed home for years and read everything in his father's library.
Yeah, Orville was the more outgoing, mechanically minded one. He dropped out of high school to start his own printing business.
And they didn't just run a printing business, they designed and built their own printing presses. So from a young age, they had this deep, hands-on understanding of complex mechanics.
But the bicycle shop, that seems to be where it all comes together. The Wright Cycle Exchange opened in 1892.
Yes. That shop gave them 2 things. First, the money to fund their experiments. But second, and this is far more important, it gave them a philosophical framework.
The bicycle as an unstable vehicle.
Exactly. A bicycle doesn't balance itself. You, the rider, have to make constant, tiny, active adjustments to stay upright. You are in active control.
Whereas their competition, people like Samuel Langley with his huge government grants.
They were thinking about ships or trains. They wanted inherent stability. They wanted to build a machine that would just automatically fly straight and level, like a boat rights itself in the water.
And that's a fundamentally flawed way to think about flying. If you have perfect stability, you can't maneuver. You sacrifice control.
The Wrights knew that from riding bikes. They believed a flying machine should be unstable, and that the pilot's job was to master it through practice and skill. They wanted absolute control.
So what was the initial spark? I know there was a toy they had as kids.
Yeah, their father brought home a little toy helicopter in 1878. But the real turning point, when it became a serious obsession, was 1896.
A huge year for aviation.
It was. First, they read about Langley's successful unmanned model flights. And then they saw these incredible reports about the German pioneer Otto Lilienthal and his dramatic glides.
But then almost immediately after, they hear that Lilienthal crashed and died.
And that, they said, was the real beginning of their serious work. It proved 2 things at once. Gliding practice was the right path, but Lilienthal's method of control, just shifting his body weight around, was totally inadequate. It was a dead end, literally.
So they needed a mechanical system.
Right. And Wilbur got the idea from watching birds. He noticed they don't shift their weight to turn, they change the angle of the tips of their wings. They bank into a turn, just like a cyclist does.
And this leads to the famous aha moment in the bike shop with the inner tube box.
That's the one. He's just idly twisting a long, flat cardboard box and realizes he can twist the 2 ends in opposite directions.
And that's the mechanical equivalent of what the bird's wings were doing.
Precisely. One wingtip gets more lift, the other gets less, and the whole thing rolls. They called it wing warping. It was the first piece of the puzzle. a mechanical solution for lateral or roll control. They tested it on a little 5-foot kite in 1899, and it worked.
So right from the start, they're on a completely different path from everyone else who's just thinking about rudders, like on a boat.
Completely different. They understood that to turn in the air, you had to roll. So by 1900, they were ready to build a full-scale glider. They needed a place with good wind and soft sand for the inevitable crashes.
And they end up at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina.
Yeah, on the advice of another aviation enthusiast, Octave Chanute. But they also picked it because it was remote. They wanted privacy from reporters.
And their early gliders, they weren't reinventing everything from scratch, were they? They were building on what others had done.
No, they were smart about it. They used the biplane design Chanute recommended, and they used cambered or curved wings, which is a known principle for generating lift.
But they did add one really important safety feature.
The canard design. They put the elevator, the surface, for controlling pitch, for going up and down out front. The idea was that if the glider stalled, the nose would drop first, preventing that catastrophic nosedive that killed Lilienthal.
So they're thinking about control and safety from day one. But the 1901 glider, it didn't go well.
It was a complete disaster. 2 massive problems. First, it only produced about a third of the lift their calculations said it should. It just wouldn't fly right.
And the second problem was even worse.
Much worse. When Wilbur tried to use the wing warping to turn, the glider would sometimes spiral into the ground. It was suffering from something they called, something we now call adverse yaw.
Okay, let's break that down because it's so important.
Right. So when you warp the wings to roll, say to the right, you increase the lift on the left wing. But increasing lift also increases drag. So that left wing, the one that's lifting up, is also being dragged backward.
Ah, so it pulls the nose of the plane away from the turn.
Exactly. You want to turn right, but for a split second, the nose yaws to the left. It's incredibly dangerous if you can't control it.
And Wilbur was just crushed by this failure.
He was. This is when he made that famous comment to Orville that man wouldn't fly in 1,000 years. But here's the crucial part. Instead of giving up, they became scientists. They realized the problem wasn't them, it was the data. All the published aeronautical data was wrong.
They started with that lift problem and a number called the Smeaton coefficient.
Yeah, a value for air pressure that engineers have been using for over 100 years. The standard value was 0.00054. Wilbur went over all their flight data and proved that the real number was much lower, closer to 0.0033.
So the very foundation of their calculations was flawed by almost 50%.
Completely flawed. But just correcting the number wasn't enough. They realized Lilienthal's tables for lift on different wing shapes were also wrong, or at least they didn't apply to their designs. They had to generate their own data.
And they built that incredible little device with the bicycle wheel to prove it.
A brilliant, simple experiment. It proved the official tables were wrong, so they decided they needed their own laboratory.
Back in the bike shop, in the fall of 1901, they built a 6-foot-long wooden box, a wind tunnel.
This was the game changer. It wasn't the first wind tunnel, but it was the first one designed to systematically and accurately measure lift and drag on hundreds of different miniature wing shapes.
And the little balances they built inside to measure the forces, they were made from bicycle spokes and scrap metal.
Just incredible ingenuity. And in about 2 months, they tested around 200 different wing designs. Historians call it the most crucial and fruitful aeronautical experiments ever conducted.
And they made a key discovery about the shape of the wings.
A huge discovery. They found that long, narrow wings, what we call a high aspect ratio, were far more efficient. They had a much better lift-to-drag ratio than the short, stubby wings they'd been using.
So armed with this brand new, super accurate data, they built the 1902 glider.
And it was a spectacular success. They made hundreds of glides going over 600 feet, but there was still that one problem.
Adverse yaw, the well digging.
It was still there. Their 1902 glider had a fixed vertical rudder at the back, but it wasn't solving the problem. And then Orville has the final breakthrough.
What was it?
He realized the fixed rudder was actually making things worse. It was fighting the turn. He figured out that the rudder needed to be movable, and this is the genius part, it needed to be linked to the wing warping mechanism.
So that when you warp the wings to roll, the rudder automatically moves to counteract the adverse yaw.
Precisely. And they realized the rudder's main job wasn't to steer the plane like a boat. Its job was to keep the nose pointed correctly through the turn that was being initiated by the wings.
Roll, pitch, and yaw.
The 3-axis control system. They had solved it. That 1902 glider is, for all intents and purposes, the invention of the airplane. The motor was just an add-on after that.
And they filed their patent based on that glider before they had even flown with an engine.
Exactly. The patent was for the control system because they knew that was the real secret.
Okay, so control is solved. Now they just need to add power.
Yeah. It turned out to be a huge challenge. They needed a lightweight engine, but when they wrote to car manufacturers, nobody could build one that was light enough.
So they did what they always did.
They built it themselves. Well, with their shop mechanic, the brilliant Charlie Taylor. He built them a 12-horsepower engine in about 6 weeks.
And it had an aluminum engine block, which was incredibly advanced and rare for the time.
It was. And you have to remember the cost. Their entire 1903 flying machine, engine included, cost them less than $1,000 of their own money.
Well, Samuel Langley had $50,000 in government funds, and his machine just plopped into the Potomac River.
Twice. A total failure. The contrast is just stunning.
And the propellers were another piece of original engineering.
Another one, yeah. There was no existing science for air propellers, so they had this incredible intellectual leap. They realized a propeller is basically just a wing that rotates vertically.
So they could use all that precious data from their wind tunnel tests to design it.
Exactly. They designed these incredibly efficient wooden propellers. Modern tests show they were about 82% efficient, which is, that's remarkably close to what we can achieve today.
So finally, we're at Kill Devil Hills, December 17th, 1903. Freezing cold, crazy strong headwind.
Orville wins the coin toss. And at 10:35 in the morning, he makes the first flight.
The first controlled, sustained flight of a heavier-than-air-powered aircraft. 120 feet. 12 seconds.
They flew 4 times that day, with Wilbur taking the last and longest flight, 852 feet in 59 seconds.
And then after all that work, a gust of wind just picks up the machine and smashes it to pieces.
Yeah, it never flew again. And the public reaction was, well, nothing.
A total fizzle. The local paper wouldn't even run the story. They said the flights were too short to be important.
The world just completely missed it. But the Wrights knew they weren't done. A few short hops and a strong headwind didn't prove they had a practical machine.
So they moved their operations back home to a cow pasture in Ohio called Huffman Prairie.
Right. And over the next 2 years, 1904 and 1905, they refined the machine. They add a catapult for takeoff since the winds aren't as strong. And in 1904, Wilbur flies the first complete circle in history.
But the 1905 Flyer III, that was the real masterpiece.
It was. They rebuilt it after a bad crash and made a crucial change to the controls. They separated the rudder control from the wing warping.
So the pilot now had independent control of all 3 axes.
Yes. A hip cradle for roll, a stick for pitch, a handle for yaw. It gave the pilot so much more finesse and authority.
And the results were just undeniable.
Oh, absolutely. By the fall of 1905, Wilbur was flying for over half an hour at a time, covering 24 miles, doing laps around the pasture, until he literally ran out of gas. They had created the world's first practical airplane.
And then, after achieving all that, they just stopped flying.
For almost 3 years. They were terrified someone would steal their design before they could sell it to the government. This secrecy, though, it backfired. The U.S. Army was skeptical. The press was skeptical.
The whole world was skeptical.
It fueled years of intense doubt.
And that doubt turned into outright hostility, especially in Europe. By 1906, they were being called bluffers. Bluffers.
Yeah, a Paris newspaper famously wrote something like, "The Wrights have flown or they have not flown. They are in fact either flyers or liars." That was the mood.
So they had to prove it. In 1908, they finally get contracts, but they have to do public demonstrations. Wilbur goes to France. Orville stays to demonstrate for the U.S. Army.
And Wilbur, in Le Mans, France, in August 1908, he just blows everyone's minds.
It wasn't just that he could fly, it was how he flew.
Over the banking turns, no one in Europe had seen that. They were still trying to do flat, skidding turns with rudders. When Wilbur did these graceful, coordinated, banked figure eights, the skepticism just evaporated overnight.
He became a global celebrity.
Instantly. Meanwhile, Orville is back in Virginia doing the same thing for the Army, breaking flight duration records.
But then tragedy strikes. September 17th, 1908.
A terrible day. He's flying with an Army observer, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, and a propeller splits midair. The plane crashes.
And Lieutenant Selfridge becomes the first person to die in an airplane crash.
He does. And Orville is horrifically injured. Broken leg, broken ribs, hip fractures that would cause him pain for the rest of his life.
It's just an awful story. But his response, even from the hospital bed, was just so determined.
Defiant, really. He said the only thing he was afraid of was not getting well soon enough to finish the tests. This is also when their sister, Catherine, really steps into the public eye, managing everything while Orville recovered.
After he recovers, the three of them become these global icons, touring Europe, meeting royalty. They finally complete the army contract and start to see some financial success.
But that success leads directly into the next big, draining chapter of their lives, the patent wars.
It all centered around that 1906 patent for the control system.
Right. And their main legal opponent was another aviation pioneer, Glenn Curtiss. Curtiss was using ailerons' little hinged flaps on the wings for roll control instead of wing warping.
And he argued that ailerons were a totally separate invention.
But the Wright's patent was written very broadly. It covered any method of varying the angle of the wings to create a roll. And Wilbur, especially, saw this as a moral fight. He felt Curtiss was stealing the fundamental principle of their invention.
And the legal battle was just all-consuming.
It was. It drained their money, their time, and their creative energy. Wilbur said he felt sad when he thought about what they could have invented if they hadn't been stuck in courtrooms.
It's really a tragic turn. They were inventors, not litigators.
And they climaxed with Wilbur's death in 1912 from typhoid fever. He was only 45. And many people, including his family, believe the stress of the patent wars wore him down and made him unable to fight off the illness.
It's just devastating. The wars didn't even end until World War I, when the government basically forced all the companies into a patent pool to speed up production.
And in the ultimate irony, the Wright Company eventually merged with the Curtiss Company in 1929. They became Curtiss-Wright.
Wow.
After Wilbur's death, Orville just wasn't interested in running a company anymore. He sold it in 1915.
He became more of an elder statesman for aviation.
Exactly. He served on the board of NASA, the precursor to NASA, for 28 years. He was a guiding hand for American aviation for decades.
There's a really nice family story from before Wilbur died, though. In 1910, they finally flew together.
Yeah, their father had made them promise to never fly together, just in case, but they did it once. And right after that, Orville took his 82-year-old father, Milton, up for his first and only flight.
And his dad just yelled, "Higher, Orville, higher."
A great story. It shows you how much of a family project this really was.
But Orville's later life was also defined by this really intense feud with the Smithsonian Institution.
A battle over historical truth. The Smithsonian was desperate to prop up the reputation of its former secretary, Samuel Langley, whose aerodrome had failed so publicly.
So they put Langley's machine on display and claimed it was the first machine capable of manned flight.
And they based that claim on these shady tests done in 1914 by Glenn Curtiss, of all people. Curtiss had taken Langley's machine and secretly made dozens of major modifications to get it to fly for a few seconds.
Including adding his own control system.
Of course. And the Smithsonian just ignored all that. Orville was furious. He called it a perversion of history.
So he refused to give them the original 1903 flyer.
He did. As a protest, in 1928, he sent it to the Science Museum in London. He was making a stand.
And the feud lasted for decades.
It wasn't resolved until 1942, when the Smithsonian finally gave in, published a list of all of Curtiss's modifications, and officially recanted their claims. Only then did Orville agree to have the flyer brought home.
And there's a clause in the contract, isn't there?
A fascinating one. The Smithsonian bought the plane for $1 with the legal condition that they could never again claim that an earlier aircraft was capable of controlled flight.
So the legacy is secure, and it's a legacy that continues with the friendly rivalry between Ohio, the birthplace of aviation pioneers, and North Carolina, first in flight.
And it's even gone off-world. A piece of the original flyer's wing fabric went to the moon with Neil Armstrong on Apollo 11.
And another piece is on Mars, attached to the Ingenuity helicopter. NASA even named the Martian airfield Wright Brothers Field.
It's an incredible tribute. Orville lived until 1948, long enough to see the dawn of supersonic flight. He saw his invention go from a 12-second hop to breaking the sound barrier.
So when you, our listener, think about this, what's the big takeaway? For me, it's that they didn't just invent a machine. They invented the method, the mechanism of control.
That's it. They solved the problem of balance and stability with science, with their wind tunnel and their data, before they even thought about adding an engine. The three-axis control system is why their invention worked, and it's why every single plane flying today still uses their fundamental philosophy.
And we should leave you with one final, kind of a heavy thought from Orville himself. Late in his life, seeing the destruction caused by bombers in World War II, he said, "We dared to hope we had invented something that would bring lasting peace to the earth. But we were wrong."
It raises that timeless question, doesn't it, about the burden of invention. How do you reconcile your hope for what your creation can do with the unintended and sometimes terrible ways that the world ends up using it. That's a weight the Wrights carried long after they left the dunes of Kitty Hawk.